Like psychedelics it's like going to the edge of the world, and somebody, you're strapped into a harness, and your friend is letting you look out the edge and see what else is there, and you can come back. So a trusting anchor needs to be there, because the danger of psychedelics is also part of it, which is that we can go out on our own and we can get lost.
So there is that understanding that, yes, when we treat patients, they're going into a psychedelic experience. They are going to be in an altered state of consciousness for a brief period of time. And what happens in that altered state of consciousness, if it's not in a safe, supported, facilitated way?
I am incredibly excited to dive into this conversation with two medical doctors who are not just looking from a bio lens, but also really a biopsychosocial, spiritual lens as they help their patients and their clients uncover and dispel so many myths and barriers as it relates to mental health in their mind, as well as in their life. If you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on all of my socials, on Instagram, on TikTok. We're also on podcast, wherever you get your podcast. And one of the best ways to support this channel is also by becoming a member. And through that membership, we put all of that money, reinvest it back into this community and into making this podcast and this channel better and better and better. So I really, really appreciate y'all's support in that way. So without further ado, we will just jump right into the interview with Dr. Ahmad and Dr. Rahman. All right, so I am back here to Phil's Guide to PsyD. We have two amazing, incredible clinicians that I'm excited to. I just have so many questions for you two. We have Dr. Ahmad and Dr. Rahman. Both of you are medical doctors. So my channel, my podcast is dedicated towards typically clinical psychology students or people who are wanting to become therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists and work in the mental health field. Lately, I've been collaborating a lot with medical providers because mental health impacts physical health impacts mental health. And so I think both of you have a lot to say about that, but could we maybe just do a brief introduction? Do you each mind just giving you a little bit of a bio in terms of what you do and what you specialize in?
So my name is Rahman. Dr. Alia and I share a lot of threads in our bio. So I'll just kind of start there, that we're both pediatric hospitalists. So we've worked in the front lines, in the inpatient care of kids from birth all the way to in their 20s. We're international, in our scope as well. So I actually am a foreign graduate, and I, have been in the United States for 25 years and did my residency in New York. Worked at a children's hospital, worked at a trauma center, and now in my third iteration, I am a ketamine assisted psychotherapy provider here in Southern California.
Wow.
And I partner with therapists and provide this new kind of way of treating treatment-resistant mental health conditions for both adults and adolescents. I'm also a medical educator. I teach at USC. And we both have a podcast called The Two Curious MDs, where we talk about psychedelics, healing, storytelling, all the different ways that we're learning to be curious about our this kind of next stage and what is happening to psychiatry, psychology, with all the different modalities that are now available. And so with that, I'll stop and let Dr. Ahmad pick up on her bio.
Love that.
Very similar bio. I'm also a pediatric hospitalist. I'm in Northern California, so Sacramento area. I grew up in Texas, essentially, and did my training and residency in Texas, then worked overseas for about 10 years after my training and faculty position. I've been an academic hospitalist, both in Texas, overseas when I was working. And then when I came back, I was at UCSF and then teaching. Both of us have been trained in narrative medicine and have applied that in our teaching, both in the hospital as well as residents and students, and then have done several workshops and do training and education outside of on narrative medicine. And I also have a practice in ketamine treatment and mental health, integrative medicine. Both of us have also been trained in integrative medicine, so I'm going to add that in. And we kind of coalesce those three components: psychedelic medicine, ketamine-assisted therapy, along with integrative medicine, to really talk about healing the mind, body, soul. As physicians, we see that that's kind of left separate, and we only focus on systems-based care, but really bringing in and tuning into all aspects of what makes us human and what makes a condition show up itself in the body, from the story, from the context of the illness itself.
Wow.
I don't know what else to say. We both practice. I take care of veterans here in our center, and seen thousands of cases now, then thousands of kind of sessions and patients, and seeing kind of a lot of transformation in healing when you're able to sit with patients both and take care of their medical health, but also their spiritual and emotional health. And in our center, we also have therapists, so we work hand in hand. We work as a team. It's a multidisciplinary type of setting where we really focus on the therapist, the nursing, the clinician, the doctor, the psychiatrist, the medicine interacting with in that therapeutic setting.
Oh, that is amazing. Clearly, you both have quite a comprehensive just background as relates to the clinical care, research, teaching. So what's interesting, there's a few things that are kind of going on in my mind. I also have worked in the VA and work with veterans, and I have a lot of family members and friends in the medical field who have gone through medical school, who are medical doctors, psychiatrists, and things like that. And it's interesting because a lot of them have told me how, when it comes to their classes, they didn't have a lot of education in classes as relates to integrative health and sort of collaborative or multidisciplinary care, or just not looking at the body from from a reactionary perspective, right? But really looking more preventative and being proactive about health. What made y'all both want to look into ketamine assisted treatment? Because there is a lot of different types of modalities that doesn't necessarily fit into the framework of strictly medicine, but for y'all, what was the thing that attracted y'all to that type of treatment?
I think when it comes to this, there's a big question, because I think what you're addressing is that, for years and years and years, I practiced with absolutely no understanding of this, or not thinking that this was a thing. And when I say this, I mean psychedelic healing. We're really focused in on the neuroplasticity, the antidepressant effect, just this tool, right? And for years, I was a sedation provider. So I was providing ketamine and other medications to kids of all ages who were in the hospital, who were in the ICU, who needed to be sedated for a procedure. So it's not like we didn't know how to use the medicine and we didn't know everything there was to know about the medicine, but there's this one aspect of it which had not kind of filtered down into our consciousness, So there's knowledge that's available, and yet we were barriered from it. We were taught that if you use ketamine, somebody will have a dissociative effect and they'll come out of it very combative. And that's true. We've seen it. And so that would confirm our beliefs about ketamine. And so you have to understand, for us to kind of make the leap to, seeing ketamine from a different viewpoint was really about taking the chance that we were not seeing the complete picture about something that we thought we knew, right? Ketamine's been around since the 60s. It was started to be used in the battlefield in Vietnam It's really well regarded because it's safe. It helps people breathe, even as their body is not feeling, their mind is not feeling the pain that their body is going through. So you can actually, it was a very favored medication to use in people with asthma who are in the emergency room and maybe needed to be sedated to set a bone, as we use ketamine. So it's just all of these things, right, that we had to kind of really reconcile. So it's a process. So what made us was curiosity. I think, that's why we kind of went with like, wow, this exists. I didn't know this, just the fact that as physicians, we say we know everything about a situation. And I think, thank you for centering narrative medicine, because when we center narrative medicine, we recognize, well, whose story is this about ketamine, right? And then the second question is, whose story is this about psychedelics? Who gets to tell the story about psychedelic medicine, right? And generally what's the way that we're taught in medical school and in academia and in, the mainstream medicine, the fear of psychedelics, right? And the fear of psychedelics came up at a very certain time in the United States and then led to the war on drugs and led to the criminalization of plant medicine. Like this whole thing, right, is just in front of us. And, so it took a lot of unlearning, is what I'm getting at. It took a lot of unlearning to get to the point where we can see, okay, so if we're saying that ibogaine, which is now, the research of ibogaine and psychedelics has just been passed into, in California, they've actually removed the barriers for research into these molecules just this last week, right? We're talking November 2025. Yeah. So, right. And then there's states that are starting to legalize. So we found ourselves kind of, when you have knowledge, you all of a sudden look at the knowledge and go, wait a second, this means something. And I think separately, because Alia, you started your practice a year and a half or something before ours, but we both kind of realized we were paralleling each other in recognizing the potential of this medicine and how, and it kind of, I think, it appears sometimes serendipitously. I have to ask myself the question. I was doing sedations with ketamine for 10 years and teaching people how to do this in children for 10 years. And I find myself now, not with a department that can support it, not in a situation where, insurance is going to cover this new modality. And yet feeling that it's important enough work to take that initiative, to step out of that comfort zone, So it's that, and the potential of the medicine itself, and plant medicine in general, that I think is like really, you talk about every single large university system right now that has a neuroscience department, they are studying psychedelics and they're combining it with EEG, TMS, functional MRI. I mean, this is leading some of the research into consciousness that we have.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about and I'll briefly just add on to what Simi, I call it Simi, Dr. Rahman, story is very similar to mine. Mine actually really began with, again, my own healing, my own work, and feeling like there was something going on that was not right, and I couldn't really name it. And so I started studying narrative medicine, and really, and then COVID occurred, and then had this opportunity to do a medicine that I wasn't very familiar with at all, and but it plant medicine, and it really just opened up my eyes. It was a serendipitous kind of discovery, and I said, wow, this is pretty amazing that you can actually feel better about who you are as a person and work through some of the grief, the trauma, in a very supportive way. And so then began that quest to study this science of this process, which is how we started, both of us started going, into the books and into the, training. And really, I had to convince myself scientifically that this can work. And I also had an extensive amount of experience in ketamine, and ketamine, for me, my experience with ketamine was like, oh, it's kind of a cute drug. It's kind of an easy drug to use, and kids have kind of fun with it. I used to see a lot of kids, being very relaxed and chill and very easy to talk to, and very engaging. I even had one patient who was catatonic, who we did a lumbar procedure, and the next he was depressed. He was something had happened to him, and he was very catatonic. And we did a procedure, and the next few days after that, he was talking, and then he relapsed back. But that association with ketamine was not made at that time. I was like, oh my God, he actually had ketamine, and that's what helped him come out of his catatonia. So it was things kind of just started to make sense. Your own work started to make sense. Your own work as a physician started to make more sense. Like, there's a way to help and do your work as a doctor in a deeper, more meaningful way. And that's why ketamine and psychedelic medicine are very, very important to the future, I think, of psychiatry and interventional psychiatry. As Simi was saying, the importance of really adding tools to the tool belt of treatment, therapy also included. This is not a procedural type of process. This is a very holistic process, and really applying the science behind that and building that into what the patient needs and supporting that versus the top-down care that's currently the way system is. It's like, we give you a prescription and you go home and figure it out. No, this is about learning through this process what you need to help you be better.
Yeah, that's an incredible explanation in terms of the different modalities that I think people have heard before, but maybe they don't really quite understand. There's some skepticism, there's some maybe critique, and then there's also questions from a societal perspective of like, how do you change the traditional structure of where medicine is at to be more inclusive or collaborative or integrative, to where we see all of the research evidence-based tools that are actually effective. These are things that have been effective for quite some time. So I'm curious about psychedelics because, I think from a conceptual basis and even from a research perspective, it makes so much sense. But what do you think are some myths as it relates to psychedelics specifically that you all can maybe dispel from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Myths. Just even recognizing that by doing or thinking about psychedelics, we're stepping into kind of the mythological realm in a way, because we're loosening. What we're saying is that we're loosening our associations, right? And when we loosen our associations to the entirely rational, what we call myth is what's there, right? So absolutely, when somebody goes into psychedelic medicine, the reason it is so important to be supported, and supported by somebody who knows the way, who knows the pitfalls, who knows what it's like to feel and be kind of out over our skis a little bit. Like psychedelics it's like going to the edge of the world, and somebody, you're strapped into a harness, and your friend is letting you look out the edge and see what else is there, and you can come back. So a trusting anchor needs to be there, because the danger of psychedelics is also part of it, which is that we can go out on our own and we can get lost, right? So some of the mythology can be, aligned to ego inflation. We can go out there and feel like, oh, we felt everything, the divinity and the beauty and the oneness. And then the story can turn inward into like, well, there can be like an ego inflation, and I'm going to heal people. And so there's a natural, when we feel better, we have energy, and there's a natural process which everybody who's felt, gone through psychedelics for the first time will have kind of like an awakening process. And it's supporting somebody through the awakening process to realize what the pitfalls are, that you don't stop there. So one of the myths is that you'll go through a psychedelic journey, it'll change everything, and then you'll get there and everything will be perfect and you'll never suffer again. And that's a huge myth. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to allow you to break out of your own frameworks just enough to see that growth is possible. And that needs a guide, but there's a danger to that.
Before this was that psychedelic medicine would create, you would make you psychotic, or that the patients that we used to see in the ER coming in on substances and a polysubstances type of exposure, that they had lost their mind, and it was kind of irreversible, or that they were so sick that they needed other medications to really blanket that, that effect. And those are the cases, of course, that were coming in, like Simi was talking about, that were not patients or people had tried a substance of some kind in an unfacilitated, unsafe way, and they were coming in because they were kind of on the edge of, and it was bizarre, and it was weird, and it was, but from a clinician's point of view, they were judged as, well, you've lost your mind, and now we need to stabilize you. So there is that understanding that, yes, when we treat patients, they're going into a psychedelic experience. They are going to be in an altered state of consciousness for a brief period of time. And what happens in that altered state of consciousness, if it's not in a safe, supported, facilitated way to process trauma, to process depression, to process grief, because essentially what these medicines do is they really lighten the default mode system, so that when the default mode way of thinking isn't so so ingrained and so ever present and dominant in that process, they're able to let go of that and just able to feel sometimes those emotions, that history that they carry in their body, to really reconcile it and to really see it as such, with a therapist and with guidance and with a process to help, again, unravel some of those things that we do carry. And trauma is carried. I had, and we continue to talk about generational trauma, generational history. And then there's the actual trauma that people go through that begins very early in life, and it carries on into a narrative, into a story, into a way of being, and it becomes an identity, and that identity is not that. You are not an anxious person. You've had things that have made you or make you feel anxious, but you are not an anxious person. So let's de-identify you from this personality that you believe in, and kind of letting go of those sort of conditionings that develop over time. So I don't know if we answered your question about myth, because there's so many myths that we hear. I hear a lot of myths from physicians. Like, how does this really work? Is this really a treatment? How does all those questions? It's a pain medicine, so how is it going to treat depression? Well, and the science in that is not really understood. And so that's also where the myth is. I would say there's more myths with physicians and people in the healthcare field than there are people who are seeking this sort of treatment and really study it from the other side. Patients, talking about people who do their research and come to you and say, I really studied this, and I really feel like this is something I need, versus the physician who comes or don't come for treatment because they don't believe that this is something that can work.
So my conceptualization and some of my own personal research that I've done, just looking into the research and some of the clinical trials that they've done, whether it's psilocybin or MDMA, and it's incredible. I mean, the success stories, people being able to sort of re-narrate their trauma, to not identify so much with their past, as you kind of alluded to. And I think one of the things that kind of bewilders me is that, okay, for something that is so effective, and there's so many success stories, and we do see some research evidence base for this, why is there so much resistance? And you both kind of talked about that, whether from the medical side, whether from a policy perspective. I think one of the things that I saw was that for a lot of people who went through psychedelic treatment, maybe they went through it for 6 to 10 sessions, and it was guided. There was a therapist there, a psychotherapist that was there to kind of help them through it. But then they didn't need any medication anymore, and it helped them to just see life from a different perspective. Now, if that was the norm and you had a number of people who were not going or taking psychiatric medication anymore, what would that do to the pharmaceutical industry? What would that do to other industries that might get sort of, it might impact that, right? And so I guess my next question is, for you all, what have you seen in terms of resistance from all of the treatments that you've talked about? What are some of the resistances that you've seen, and how have you been able to maybe combat them?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to one of that. Is I don't want to make it sound that ketamine is a cure, or MDMA or the psychedelic medicines is a cure, and that is a myth. There is no cure in any medicine, I believe, and that these medicines it's a process. What I've seen in terms of, and the reason why I think we continue to do this work is because it's so much more effective than a prescription is over time. Because yes, patients do want to come off their medications. They do want to go out and work and get exercise and eat healthier once they feel better. And the system of healthcare as it is right now for people in training, or people, what we went through in training, was very much driven to, well, you've got to see the symptom see the condition as a symptom. You're trained in the DSM-4 criteria, DSM-5 criteria. So, this patient has ADHD, and this ADHD follows this algorithm, do this prescription provided, and you're treating the symptoms. You're not really asking the question like, well, why do you even have these symptoms? It's like your condition is a disease, and it's not. It's just a collection of symptoms. But if we change that narrative and say, well, it disempowers the health system, as you said. It disempowers the health system to say, well, if we start asking those questions, it takes more time, first of all, to get to know your patients, to get to know their history. Insurances are mandating that, you have to see patients within a certain time frame to basically support your salary, support the work in the clinic, on the hospital. And it's the prescription, the pharmaceutical, that's more important. I mean, watch any news or any TV, and there'll be 50 ads about the next best drug that will fix everything for you. And it's easy to take a pill. It really is easy for even patients to be prescribed a pill, because it's harder to do this kind of work. And this work is labor intensive, and it does require, again, that commitment to get better. So the healthcare system will have to really recognize this and change its way of thinking when it comes to addressing conditions. I mean, if we just talk about hypertension is a manifestation of a conditioning that happens very, very early when somebody has a stress response to a traumatic event or to a situation. Their body goes into high cortisol activity. The body, it responds in a sympathetic way. Heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. And if that conditioning stays online all the time, what's going to happen? You're going to have hypertension. It's just, in your gut essential, there's no other reason why you have hypertension. It's just your age. Going back to, well, how do we treat that? Well, we give you a prescription to lower your blood pressure, or to tell you, okay, can you try to eat better? Can you try to work out? No, it's just easier to give that prescription but that's not solving the problem for why the hypertension is there, and how it will continue to progress, even if that conditioning, that cortisol stress, that chronic stress doesn't go away. It will continue.
Question about barriers, right? Like with the resistance. So one of the things we talk about, and you brought in, when we go to root cause, we think of what else? The conditions, the environment. And when we talk about narrative medicine, you recognize that there is every disease exists in the context in which it arises, right? And the context of our society and of our country is what it is, right? It is that, if you look at the demographic in Silicon Valley, who are part of the, kind of the engine of industry that's driving this really enthusiastic stock market, right now. If you ask anybody there, is there a barrier to psychedelics? They'll be like, no, I can get psychedelics anytime I want. I can get 5 kinds of psychedelics just delivered to my door, right? And so when you're talking about barriers, who are the barriers there for, right? If you can afford it, if you have the network, if you have access and you belong to a certain strata of society here, you have all the power to get every psychedelic. You are going to Jamaica, you are going to Costa Rica. We're not talking about access when we talk about that strata of people. We're talking about access when you talk about insurance coverage, right? Who are the people who actually rely on insurance coverage for their health care? They're the ones that are being blocked from access to psychedelics. All right. And generally speaking, when we talk about health justice, that's the population that is, in environments that they can't control. So maybe they live next to a highway. Maybe they live in a urban dense environment. Maybe there's not a lot of greenery around them. You're talking about that same hypertension model, but then apply it to the mental health condition, right? And it becomes really apparent. Yeah, nothing is going to shift it unless we can actually heal what's happened in the system and allow access to people who do need access to it, that don't have access to this medicine, right? So when we're talking about resistance, the resistance to psychedelics right now it has multiple layers to it. And I think if we can just study the different layers and recognize where it's been easier for psychedelics to be adopted and where it hasn't, and just study that difference and say, okay, who has access and what is holding that access back, and who's suffering, right? So right now, most of our patients are the ones who can afford to pay out of pocket. And we are aware that even as we do this work, it's a uneven playing field. So the people who really need it, who have multiple reasons to be stuck in depression and treatment-resistant conditions because they don't have access to clean water, food, healthy energy, and all of those sources, are already disadvantaged again by this lack of access. And the people who have access to all these, resources also have more access to psychedelics. So
I'm gonna add to what Samir is saying here, because as doctors, we're not treating conditions. We're not treating. We're not treating. We think we're treating that. We think we're treating the liver, the kidney, the system, the body, but we're really treating social injustice. And social injustice exists because of the health disparity, the disparity that exists in our environment. I'll give you an example. I had a 12-year-old who kept on coming to the hospital, kept on being admitted. She had 26 admissions for asthma. 26 inpatient admissions, and she was getting worse each time. Her level of care was increasing each time. And then I was looking through her history and going through, wow, she's been admitted this many times. And I had to go back and, scroll through her chart and go, that didn't make sense. Why is she being admitted? So I went up to the family and I said, what is going on in your home? What is your home like? And they were describing to me their home. And it was a lot of mold, a lot of, they were living in an apartment. They had rats and infestation. It was just not conducive to a healthy environment at all. So I told them, look, if there's mold in your home, you can go to the Department of Health and you can ask them to do a check on your walls, because this was in Houston, Texas, where there was a lot of flooding, and the flooding occurs in low-lying areas. And where are the low-lying areas? Who's living in the low-lying areas? Well, our people who can't afford to live anywhere else. And so the Department of Health went in, and in their bathroom there was toxic mold. It was in behind the walls of their bathroom, and it was just layered and layered. And that was treated. Like, the Department of Health told them, can't live in this, and she got better over time. So we were treating her asthma over and over again, but we were not treating it. What we really had to treat was the social injustice that exists in our population. And if we can talk about this in our healthcare system, we can really get rid of a lot of diseases that, don't even have to be there. But that's a bigger conversation to have, and that's a very, very tough one to really scale, right?
Oh my goodness, that's profound. I'm thinking of so many things. It feels like a lose-lose situation in that, for example, even for me, I go through graduate school. Graduate school is super expensive, right? And there's a lens that they're teaching you about clinical psychology and psychotherapy and mental health. And it is exclusive in that it's not maybe necessarily educating on all of these other different types of modalities. And then you start working full time, paying off student loan debt, and you're in this system where the model is see as many patients as you can. And it's a health-driven model, health insurance-driven model of, seeing the medical providers, 15-minute appointments. There's not a lot of education, psychoeducation. There's not a lot of relationship. There's not a lot of rapport building. And if you do take the time to spend time with your patients and educate and think outside of the box, then sometimes you might get penalized for it. And then you go into private sector and you realize, oh, wow, now I have so much freedom. I can actually do what I want to do. I'm a certified personal trainer. And so one of the things that I've done is I've done walk and talk therapy and tried to include exercise integrated with mental health. So many benefits, so much research for that. But it is, it's not covered by insurance. And so it's more expensive, right? And so people are paying out of pocket. And so now you're helping a certain demographic that can pay for it. But then the demographic that you really want to help, at least for me, that I know, of course, needs the help, isn't in a system that's helping them. And so I don't know if this is really even a question, but then how do you all maybe reconcile that in terms of what you're doing right now? And maybe, how do we as a society or what are some of the solutions to that for providers and also for patients?
Well, Veterans Day is coming up. And the VA, the veterans, there's a lot of push to bring in psychedelics into the veteran space, and it's already happening, and it will continue to happen. And that's a population that needs to be served and has, and I'll also say that by serving and treating veterans, we also serve and treat their families secondary, right? Because once one person gets better, it helps the other, it helps the family, it helps the community, and that's really the way forward. I think is that really focusing on the populations that are being, are really affected by the way the condition has developed into, and so we're really treating the cream of the crop right now. But access in terms, it took me 30 years of being in medical practice to come out of it to say, no, enough is enough, got to do this. And the reason why we do ketamine treatment is because it works and it gets people better. And yes, they do have to pay out of pocket. But yes, there is funding. There's more movement and more private donation and work that's being currently developed to really support this question of access for all. There's organizations out there that do, help patients get treated within this manner. But it's outside of the regular system of care. And I believe that if by really talking to this and really developing a community, a network of providers and healers who really are thinking outside the box, we will get there. It's going to take a long time, but we will get there. And I'm sure AI has a lot to do with this too. The use of AI and the application of AI to fill the gap in healthcare is already happening. Patients are using AI for therapy, for their medical questions, for their concerns, and really asking those questions that aren't being answered. And that itself is a way of moving forward. By utilizing that need and that demand is there, we can be creative to really build that in our practice. At least that's how I see the next 5, 10, 20 years of healthcare progressing.
I really love the empowerment message here that you brought forth, because I think, but the way we address discrepancies, address this injustice, right, that we're really talking about, like you're saying, like you're a practitioner that wants to spend more time with your patients doing a better job, and yet we're in a system which won't reward that. Let's just call it out, right? And yet we can empower ourselves to persist. And I think patients who, AI, like one of the examples, my most favorite examples was somebody who used AI to fight back against a really inflated hospital bill. So a person took a hospital bill that was coming towards them, and the insurance said you owe $100,000 or whatever, used AI to draft the letters, to call the right people, to know what their rights were, and then to negotiate the price down, and to say, no, actually the law is on my side. I don't have to do this, and the hospital backing down. So when you're talking about injustice, it has to be on that case-by-case level. You did that with the kid with the asthma. You look back at the chart and they say, there's something else here. And I think, practitioners who can really step back from a pattern and say, wait a second, we don't have the full answer, and empower their patients to tell them that, no, even in this, yes, all your conditions are against you, but even in this, you do have some power. And let me show you how. Let me be alongside you. Let me help you determine what the right way is to address it. And so with that, just writing that inequity, increasing, access to funding, access to, the insurance coverage that is there. So, there is insurance coverage for ketamine assisted, for Spravato, medication. There's insurance coverage coming up for the psychotherapy that goes alongside ketamine assisted psychotherapy, right? So there are, and the insurance companies are having to, I think it was just 2023, actually, there was a new ICD code for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, because they need to create a code to be able to reimburse the work that they're doing. Now, how we get from A to Z, there's a whole lot of steps in between, but we're going to have to crack the code, and we're going to have to make, new ways of recognizing. And yes, the pharma companies are trying to get a molecule, this is the issue, is the pharma company would rather spend millions of dollars trying to come up with a molecule that doesn't take 2 or 3 hours. Right? And so they're pouring all of their resources into doing that. And meanwhile, in the clinical realm, nobody's, looking at, well, how can we do this efficiently and effectively? And how about we fund some trials in that? Fund some of the work that we're doing here, which is that actually, no, you want a 2 to 3 hour window where there's another human being in there. It's not just about the medicine, it's about the human being. And that is, I think, and I actually wrote that down on a little Post-it. So this is this is like the kind of like where the rubber meets the road with psychedelic therapy is it a procedure or is it a therapy? Because if it's a procedure, we know how to bill for it. We can give you ketamine for sedation, I can bill, but no one knows how to do a procedure as a therapy, right? No one knows how to do a therapy as a procedure. Like they just haven't thought of it before. But what we're saying is, no, there's a third thing here that combines the two. Now figure out how to pay for it, and figure out how to bill for it, and we'll fill it. We are training psychedelic assisted psychotherapists. One of the biggest pieces that we do is education and advocacy. We are providing practicum training to all these young therapists who are, stepping into this field and getting the requisite training needed. Now they need, hours, they need practice hours, contact hours. So that's actually one of the things that we are really interested in doing is like, we're doing this work all the time. We see, a whole bunch of patients. Come and see how this work is done. Experience what it's like to be in that container, because when you see somebody change and transform, it really changes what you think yourself of your own potential for healing and your potential for this work, right? Like, I think that's one of the things we see is people who go through this healing, they take that out into the world. You'll see people, become coaches, incorporate this service element into their life because they're like, I experienced it, so I want to pass it on. So we're seeing a virtuous cycle start to happen, and we're creating the ecosystem to support that. So I love that you bring, and I can't wait to talk to you about your side of things, because why aren't we walking and talking? Why are we sitting and talking?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really brings us back to this idea of staying curious and being, asking questions, pushing the envelope, not accepting the status quo. Really, I think as doctors, as therapists, as people who are, helping others, even patients, like, why would you want to accept something that doesn't make sense to you, really? Let's ask that question. How does this work? Asking these sort of questions really, I think, changes the way people see themselves and sees the condition that they feel so subjugated by, or governed by, instead of saying, well, why do you even have this headache? Tell me more about, why you would think you would have this headache. Like, it shows up, it comes in, it's causing all these problems. Yes, we can talk about it, giving you a pain medicine for it, but tell me more about your headache. Like, what's really hurting?
Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Rahman, this has been incredible. And I feel like we could talk about this all day long, because this is such a really important topic. And I appreciate, listening to clinicians who get it, who really get it, who see it in clinical practice, who see it in the research, who are advocating for their patients in this way. And a question that I ask all of my guests as we end, maybe sort of a 20-second spiel for both of you. But what do you do for yourself? Because I could definitely tell you both pour out so much to your community, to your patients. What do you do for yourself? How do you take care of yourself, body, mind, or spirit? We can start with you, Dr. Rahman.
Oh, big question, because we have to fill the well. We have to refill, right? What do I do for myself? I get out in the sun every day and recharge. And when I can feel the sun, I feel like I can literally replenish energy. And I feel it talking to my bones. And so I think of nourishment, not just as food, but also sunlight, also the relationships. So yeah, I reach out for the good nourishment when it's there.
Really give myself a lot of compassion, more than I used to. I used to kind of always be hard on myself, and now when I make a mistake, or if I don't do something just right, I say, okay, it's okay. You got this. I talk to myself. I think having connection with my family is really, really important. And not in a connection that we do things and we go to the movies together. No, we have some time to talk. We really connect at that level. I just came back from yoga with my husband, and he held my hand while we were, stretching the Shavasana pose, and he held my hand. And just that touch really brings me back to, to me, to what really fills me is connection. Writing, I think, is also what I do for myself. When I'm really down and really questioning and wanting to figure things out, I write. And I think just staying curious always, just staying curious, reading, writing, drawing, whatever, creative way to really, sometimes help all of this stuff that we carry and really put it out there, and so that's how it's expressed and understood, and really inviting patients to do this too. And in our center, we really do focus on, even with our therapists, checking in with each other. We have a little gratitude. We made a little gratitude jar, and for our patients also fill it, and then we also fill it for each other. So it's those little things that they do add up, and connecting back to, we're not mechanical human, we are human beings, just staying in that humanistic mindset.
Yeah. Well, the title of your podcast, YouTube channel, Too Curious, and I really feel like that is a word that really encapsulates who you are in terms of what you're trying to embody and trying to really showcase for your patients. And so I appreciate just the reminder to be, curious about ourselves, curious about other people, curious about other modalities, and really have these just really beautiful conversations. So thank you both so much for your time. And I will definitely leave down all of the links, your social media links, for people to check out, because I think you all have really fantastic conversations.